Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week.
When we had Frank, I think it shook me up quite a lot in that I suddenly became very aware of things that had happened in my childhood and the experiences I went through.
It was quite a strange thing that you love and care for something that you don't know. And then that to me was where there was that, again, that sort of disconnect between the emotion and reality, or what your brain is prepared to deal with.
And I found myself just slowly getting to a point where I could function again. And I thought if there are new dads going through similar experiences, maybe from their own childhood, their own traumas, I felt like I had the tools to be able to help them.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. It's Mental Health Monday.
Hey, howdy, we're the home of the UK's conversation about mental health. Welcome to the Mental Health Monday podcast. Great guest on the way for you this week. At the time of speaking to you today, can you believe this, after 2.5 years or whatever, I've actually caught COVID. I feel all right, don't worry. But I did a test today because I felt a little bit under the weather, and we still had some left around in the cupboard. And sure as the sun rises at 4:45 during the summer, there was 2 lines on the test. Yeah, and my first positive test through the whole of the pandemic. Now, my little lad, he got it as well this week. He had a tough day of it, but after that, he's been bouncing around the house. He's been absolutely fine. I thought it's only a matter of time, because when you've got a just 4-year-old who is, ill, it's impossible to ignore, avoid. And I think probably it's fair to say the damage that would have been done by locking him in his room and not speaking to him for 3 days would have been much worse than the physical damage that COVID would have done to him. I should be okay, but if there's no podcast next week, the reason is I've been struggling a little bit more than I thought. Should be all right, though. And I've got some interesting conversations on the way actually lined up for the next few weeks. So it's a busy old time on Mental Health Monday. Fingers crossed we'll be absolutely fine. Now, this week's guest is called Pete Smyth. Now, Pete is a really top guy. He has been, for a number of years now, been working with Parents in Mind, which is an NCT service in St Helens. If you've had kids, you'll know about NCT in terms of sort of the training, the awareness, knowledge that you need to be a new parent, the things you've got to know, and so on and so forth. But what this new Parents in Mind service is about is based around dads and supporting new dads around mental health with things like one-to-ones, group sessions, and walk and talks as well. There's also a podcast, a video series as well you can catch called Being Dad. That's up on YouTube. I'll put a link to all of these things up in the notes for the podcast. But I just wanted to flag it as a really important thing because, of course, becoming a dad for the first time can make a huge difference to people's lives. It was an absolutely game-changing thing for me in particular. So it's no surprise that for many people it can be difficult, it can be challenging, but as we'll hear as well, it can also bring back issues that maybe people had in their lives before parenthood, maybe even relationships with their own parents that they start to reassess. So there's plenty in this conversation, and I'd really urge you to check it out if you are a dad. I'm sure you relate to it, or if you're a mum, or if you are someone who's thinking about having kids at some point in the near future. It'll give you a sense of maybe some of the issues that parents do have to deal with, and the fact that, of course, it can impact our mental health. Now, Pete's a really top guy. His wife, Emma, actually put us in touch. I've known Emma for a couple of years from working on the radio in Liverpool, so I'm glad we could make that connection with Pete and hear about the work that he's doing. Now, there are a couple of pilots for the service that he's running at the moment. Pete will mention a few places dotted around the country, but I'll put a link to the NCT Parents in Mind website in the notes for the podcast to find out a little bit more about where they are and how you can connect with them. But I think the conversation's an important one. Don't forget, you can join the Mental Health Monday Facebook group. I'm also on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle, and I'm also new on Instagram as well, at Mr. Mick Coyle on there as well. Put a few sort of personal photos on there, bits of gardening that I'm doing, things that I do to sort of keep on the right side of positive mental health. That's all on the Instagram feed too, at Mr. Mick Coyle. Do check that out. Started off having a conversation with Pete, though, by first and foremost talking about how he got involved in the Parents in Mind service.
Yeah, so last year I responded to a call out for any new dads who wanted to be a peer-to-peer mentor to other new dads who are experiencing difficulties with their mental health. It was an 8-week training course. There was 6 of us, and we just talked very openly about our experiences of being a parent, the life changes that we went through and our experiences of mental health difficulties. And there was a full range. I think the guy with the youngest child was probably he was a year old, and then there was another dad who had kids who were in their 20s. So it was a broad range of different perspectives and different backgrounds. And we all said collectively, I don't know if we'd have been friends or had met each other under different circumstances, because we are very different people. But actually, we kind of, the permission for us to all be vulnerable and open with each other has solidified. We're all very, very firm friends, and we all really look out for each other now. And it's something that I'm very proud of, that I got on board with. That was running for a couple of months, and then I was contacted to say they need one of the dads to be like the ambassador. It's a grand title. Basically, I'm responsible for making the service more known and more accessible to the wider community. At the moment, it's only based in St Helens and Halton in the northwest. It's also in Coventry, and I think it's also in London as well. But what we want to do is make it a national service, where this is just something that happens. If families are going through difficulties, there is a lot of support for mums. There's not that much support for the dads. So that's what we're trying to sort of make something a bit more of a general topic, and to open up conversations.
What was it about when you saw the call? What was it about your own experience that made you think, oh, you know what, I could probably add something to this, or this might be something which I might have a little bit of expertise on?
Yeah, good question. I think I'd been on my own little deep dive into my mental health for quite a few years. When we had Frank in 2016, it shook me up. I think it shook me up quite a lot, in that I suddenly became very aware of things that had happened in my childhood when I was a little boy, and the experiences I went through, which probably weren't that positive. I think I just felt pure unconditional love for this little thing, and I wanted to shower him in everything and nurture him and be there for him. And I became aware that that wasn't necessarily the case for me as a child. Quite a bit of reflection came from that. Then in 2018, my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And if I'm honest, I think my whole world just unraveled from that point. I experienced incredible anxiety, depression, guilt, shame, intrusive thoughts. It spiraled for a long, long time. It was also coming to terms with the fact that this man that I didn't really have much of a relationship with was now very vulnerable and needed me. And I effectively became his parent. I effectively was one of his main carers and looked after him and made sure he felt safe and felt supported. That went on for a couple of years. He sadly passed away at the end of 2020 in the middle of one of the lockdowns. So we couldn't really do much around it. We didn't have any chance to celebrate or connect as a family. It left a big void in my life. Even though this was a person that I probably didn't have that much of a connection to, it was someone that had been important to me when I was young. And now they were gone. It was like this void had happened, and I was left with this trauma, I guess, this trauma that just sat with me. I guess I did a lot of self-care. I like to meditate. I like to write. I like to, I do cold water exposure. I don't know if you heard of Wim Hof. I do a bit of that and all these little things just to ground me and help me. And I found myself just slowly getting to a point where I could function again. And I thought, if there are new dads going through similar experiences, maybe from their own childhood, their own traumas, I felt like I had the tools to be able to help them through that and guide them through that process, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for being so honest about sort of your experience there. I think it says a lot, doesn't it, about perceptions that we have. I think people think there's sort of like a balance, isn't there, that your parents love you, care for you, and then there's a sort of sense that you might have to look after them a little bit as they get older, but then at
Yeah.
the same time, you'll take on these extra responsibilities from a new generation that's coming. I think there's almost like a sort of, as humanity, we're almost preconditioned to sort of maybe accept that there's a natural cause of events there. But actually, what you've just described there is something where the emotive link is sort of is shaken up throughout that maybe the thing that you thought was there wasn't there, and then the circumstances place you in a position maybe ahead of where you thought you'd be. So I guess that natural thing where your brain might be ready to absorb is shaken up, and you've suddenly got to deal with all of those things, but sounds like almost in the wrong order, or in a way which your brain would have to go, well, why is this all happening in this order? Shouldn't I be focusing on this new little, not the older person? And shouldn't the older person have been looking after me? And then dealing with that memory and all of that stuff that sounds like just so much to take on and for your brain to sort of deal with.
Yeah. I had quite a few conversations with my wife that nobody warned you about this chapter of your life when you hit middle age, and suddenly you're balancing children and parents. Your children obviously need you, and then your parents get more and more vulnerable. So they're not supporting you so much as you now have to support them. And it was quite a wrestle. It was quite a shock to be in that position, because you do, like you said, when you have children, you imagine that your parents will be there as like a safety net to kind of help you. And quite often that is the case, and quite a lot of people still have that, but we didn't. And that just, compounded everything, I think.
I guess as well, when you look at sort of becoming a parent for the first time and dealing with sort of parenthood, there is that aspect of sort of the emotion which you're ready to place into a situation, but then having to deal with other emotions at the same time means that you might not necessarily feel like you can give 100% of yourself to a circumstance, or commit yourself 100% to a circumstance as well. And I think, again, when we look at preconceptions, I think some people think a child will come into our life and we will love it and we will care for it, and then we will naturally grow into that relationship. But life circumstances quite clearly are different for different people, and also maybe people's connection points when that emotion might kick in or not will be different as well. And I guess we don't know when that is, because that's largely an internal process, isn't it?
Yeah, big time. I think I had a determination. I mean, this is all to do with my own self-loathing or whatever it is, but I vividly remember we had a C-section for Frank. It was 2 weeks overdue. Emma was taken away to be kind of taken care of, and I had Frank at my chest. I was just holding him, skin to skin, that beautiful kind of bonding moment. And the first thought that popped in my head was, I hope he's not disappointed. Like, I had that concept that this little thing would possibly be disappointed with me as an outcome. And I thought, wow, that's a powerful negative thing I've gone there. And it purely relates to the fact of how me and my dad had related to each other. But I think to my own detriment, I invested myself wholeheartedly in Frank and what I could be for him. And it was to my own detriment. And then I look back on the time when my dad was ill, and my parents actually lived with us when he was diagnosed. So we had it like front and center in our life. And I feel a little bit sad that part of me wasn't really with Frank all that time, because he was 2 years old at this point, and I had to kind of almost shut myself down so that I could be functional for him and functional for my dad. And I think I don't know if that's something that many people have talked about, because I've never heard of anyone giving that any airtime.
I mean, and it's quite something that you recognized in yourself, that you thought that the moment of holding him for the first time, I hope I'm not disappointed. I guess I'm not saying you're lucky to have been able to sort of capture that, but I wonder how many people maybe have that thought or negative feelings, but don't recognize them as negative feelings. They just think, oh, this is how I feel, or this is what life was like for me, and maybe this. So I wonder whether or not, and this, I guess, it's down to your own sort of emotional intelligence, that you at least recognized that was an emotion, and maybe an emotion which wasn't hugely a positive thing to be thinking. Which again, which I guess, and over a period of years now, has allowed you to reflect on that and hopefully rebalance maybe.
Yeah, big time. It's all part of the journey. They're all little shuffles forward on it, and I think that's something that's occurred to me is when you're dealing with any kind of health issue itself, there isn't always going to be a hallelujah moment where everything's fixed and you're magically okay again. It's like, well, actually, you've just changed. Like, you have just changed as a human. And when you have a child, when you have a death in the family, you change as a human anyway. So being able to recognize these are just natural shuffles forward and natural, like my awareness levels, my empathy has gone up like 20-fold since having a child, because I'm not as important anymore. There's someone else in my life who's equally as important. It's a cliche, but it feels like until you've experienced some kind of suffering or some kind of challenge in your life, maybe you're not open to empathy. Maybe you're not open to that thing because you haven't experienced it firsthand. And like we talked about earlier, unless you've got skin in the game for this thing, you almost have no reason to care.
I think somebody said to me the other day, it was somebody on Twitter, it was being a bit sniffy about the phrase lived experience. When did experience become lived experience? And I said, well, it's lived experience, because it's not just like, oh, I have experience. Yeah, I've babysat a couple of times. I know about kids. You got a bit of experience, and I have literally lived this. Like I've woken up in the morning and lived through. So it's not just something that I'm aware of that I know a little bit about. This is my life, and which is why I think lived experience is a phrase which works. But that emotion, and I think, and I had it as well. I've still never seen it written down or explained in a way which I can go, that's it, that's the feeling. When I try and say to people, your life, when people say your life will change forever when you become a parent. And that's not for me to say, if you don't become a parent, you've missed out on this great thing. But like what I'm saying is, that's absolutely right. And I think as much as anything, and I don't know if you had this experience with your partner in the hospital, where you're not just the least, you're not the most important person in your own life anymore. You then actually get bumped down to like third in the list when you first become a parent, because you see what your partner has gone through and realize actually their vulnerability through that particular period and how important they are to the world that you have. That it's their body that has to sort of create. And I don't know if that was a thing to me where you suddenly go, oh, I'm not, it sort of humbles you, but at the same time, it throws this responsibility at you. So you can't be, oh, I'll be humble, I better, take a step back. It's be humble, but also you better take 5 steps forward and be prepared to carry on taking these steps forward for the, and emotively, I don't know, I can't think of another way of describing that than that humble to responsibility discord.
Absolutely.
But I felt like, and when I kind of feel lucky when I became a parent, because me and my wife would go for like a walk and we would talk about having kids. And I felt, and again, I don't know if I can sort of emote this, but I felt a physical urge to have children. Like, when people are, he's very cuddly around kids. I need this like feeling. I could feel it. Like it was like, it would jump out on my chest. And we'd go for walks and we'd imagine that one day we'd be walking, but holding a child's hand.
Yes.
And it was all, and I was like, this is actually a really strong emotion. And I presume it's evolutionary that it kicks in so that you go, you should probably have children now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I then felt very lucky that when I went to sort of classes just before the birth, and I was like, I'm ready for this because it's the thing that I really want. And I remember there was one of the dads said, and they were like, what are your thoughts and fears? And I was thinking like, oh, what if they don't get on in school? And like, what if that's what I was thinking. But one of the dads in the class said, what if I don't find a connection with the child? And I was just like,
wow, yeah.
Oh man, like, you're not like, I thought we were all sort of on the same page, just because it was my selfish experience had been of this thing of urge, need, and then it was coming and it was sort of, and I thought, oh wow, there's a different game afoot here. There's something else that's going on. Then equally, my moment in regard to that was when my child was born, my first child, my daughter, and having unconditional feelings and thoughts and emotions towards this child, but I didn't recognize the child. It was quite a strange thing that you love and care for something that you don't know. And then that to me was where there was that, again, that sort of disconnect between the emotion and reality, or what your brain is prepared to deal with, which, I was able to work through. And, I was in a very good place, very quickly. But it did show to me that actually at any point, emotion and connection might not meet up, and that might be before, during, after, later on at any point, that those two things can separate versus a perceived narrative, and you've got a difficult situation.
Yeah, very much so. In fact, we do, as part of our service, we started to do a series of podcasts where we interview dads about their experiences. One of the episodes, we interviewed a mum about her perception of dads and their lived experience. And she very candidly described how she saw herself as Mary Poppins. Like, she worked in school, she was great around kids, she was really enthusiastic, had this beautiful Hollywood vision of what having a baby was like. And then she had a baby and none of those things came true. And actually, she said, I felt no bond, I felt no connect. I knew functionally what I had to do, but I didn't feel this huge, like, human connection that I was expecting to feel. And she said it threw me into a spiral, and I actually, doubted myself, felt ashamed, couldn't talk about it. And it took her about a year before she said, I felt a genuine love and affection for this new being in my arms. And not enough people speak about that. Is that fact that just because you decide to have a child doesn't mean it's going to be easy, or that you're going to be instantly good at that thing. Like yourself, I was probably in my early 20s, and I thought, I'm not ready yet, but I'm definitely going to have kids. I definitely want to have kids someday. I think I'm going to be good for it. I think I've got the right tools. And it felt like a natural thing for me. That doesn't always pan out for people that way. Some people might accidentally get pregnant. Some people might think it's going to fix their relationship, and they have a family in the hope that it's going to bring some magic. But the one realization, and I'd say this to anybody, if you don't have a good, solid foundational relationship, having a child is going to be incredibly difficult, because it throws up stuff you can't imagine. And, especially if your child's ill, or if you've got any issues from your childhood, they're all going to become important again, and you're going to have to be able to deal with that. So, I've kind of gone off track a little bit there, but
no, I think it's important. Can actually, in terms of perceptions as well, because I think so much of sort of how we perceive ourselves from our mental health, a lot of it is based on what our preconceptions are about what life is going to be like. So you'll get married, or maybe you'll have kids, or you'll not. You'll get a job, then you move to a bigger house, and then you'll go on holiday. Like, people sort of imagine they have these sort of milestones, and everything's. And then if there are bumps in the road, or difficult things happen, or you have, pandemic, or there's a divorce, or anything like, or you lose your job, they're often sort of these trigger points for difficulties from our mental health. And I wonder whether or not so much of what we go through as parents as well is based on a preconception about what's coming, either from an ambitious point of view or from a lack of ambition point of view. And I guess that can come from negative experiences with parents in the past, where if you've not lived the experience of a dad who, ruffles your hair and gives you a cuddle and takes you to the footy and, shows you how, takes you for a ramble up, Movan, or whatever it would be. If you've not had that, then can you force that? Can you decide that you want to have that yourself? Or is it a case of picking up the pick? That's a really difficult thing. And of course, everyone's experience of that is different as well. So most, I guess, dads will decide, this is the sort of dad I will be this dad. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a good dad to be. No. But it's the best effort you've got, because that's been your life or lived experience of what parenthood is.
Good question. Yeah. I think my own lived experience was, I had a dad who was very disciplinarian, and his dad was very disciplinarian, and that was his role of being a good dad, was that I'm the disciplinarian. I earn the money and I tell you off when I need to tell you off. He didn't have the emotional tools to understand that that's not necessarily how you connect to your children. maybe mine was, what am I good at? I feel like I'm quite a sensitive soul. I'm quite empathic. If I'm just present in this moment, then what will be, and I will be the kind of dad that I naturally am. I guess that was my aim, was just to be naturally myself around my kid, so that he knew me and I knew him. So there was no walls, there was no pretense. It was just, he would have a model of someone who could be very present in a moment. And actually, another thing I'm proud of is, if I mess it up and I explain it to him and I say, mate, I had the best intentions, but I messed up there, and that's okay. And then he has that model that when he does something, he doesn't try and hide it or pretend everything's okay. He understands to accept his responsibilities. Maybe that was it. I didn't want to be super dad. I didn't want to be anything that I'd seen in a textbook. I just wanted to be a very real version of me, so that he would have a good model for that.
How many dads that you speak to in terms of the work you do say, use phrases like, I didn't think it would be like this, or I didn't want it to be like this, whether they're challenging themselves against a perception about what they thought was coming their way?
Yeah. I feel like they have potentially had negative experiences from their own parents, and it's put them in a place of what is a good parent, what is a good dad. Quite often the dads are quite young, and they've come into it from a place of, maybe they haven't had a chance to reflect or even know themselves enough, and they're literally doing it from instinct. And if that instinct isn't always positive, it could be, oh, well, my dad was like this, so I better be the same. My job is to earn money and be a disciplinarian. I don't know if men are given the space or the emotional platform to even reflect on stuff like that. And because of the old cliche of like, men are supposed to know what they're doing and be very strong and stoical and not vulnerable and not show fear, I actually think that compounds this feeling of, I should be better at this. If I'm not better at this, it's my fault. But I can't talk about it, because if I talk about it, then I'm weak. So there's this whole bubble of men thinking they should be better, but not able to share that feeling.
So, and I guess this is the crux of the conversation, I guess, Pete, then, is that conversation you have with them. Like, if you put, say, like the hippie dad at one side and the disciplinarian, former army colonel at the other side, and somebody's had that experience where it's been negative. I guess there might be people who've had the hippie dad experience and maybe think, he wasn't switched on enough. He didn't engage me for the real world. You might be at any point in that spectrum yourself, but then people will talk to you about their issues.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing it's not for you to say you need to be more like this. You've got to find, you've got to help give them the tools, if you like, to find their place in that spectrum.
Absolutely.
So
right.
So they can move, and they can't just jump from one to the other. They've got to find a pathway to it. And as well, and I think that's quite a difficult thing to do, to sort of give everyone the power to say, this is how you can be the best parent. And I don't know what that's going to look like, but I guess when you find that point, you'll know you're close to being there. That's a tough call to make, isn't it?
Yeah. Good
This
show.
is why you're the ambassador.
I am the ambassador. I think what I've learned is, because, like I said, a few of the dads that are in the group, St Helens is a big rugby town. There's a lot of big rugby lads there, and they don't automatically embrace vulnerability or sharing emotions in that sense. But one of the dads who actually trains younger people in rugby, we did a section on reflective parenting, where you reflect on how you reacted and why you did it. Not just instinctively tell them off, send them to the room. That's how you deal with it. Like there's some kind of template for how you deal with this. It was reflect how your child felt in that situation and what you brought to it and why you brought that. What was it that informed you in that way? And he said it changed my perception of my role. I suddenly understood I don't have to be like a two-dimensional cartoon figure of what I thought dad was. Actually, I can be very real and fleshed out. And what I'm bringing to this may be something from my past that I haven't dealt with. And he even started asking me about mindfulness, and he said that's opened up a little room in my head to look at alternative methods of dealing with my feelings and my emotions. And like you said, you can't expect everyone to go from being angry dad to suddenly being like a hippie dad. I don't know, he just meditates all day long. That isn't going to happen. And it's not necessarily going to be accessible to everyone in the same way. But these little increments of change are going to bring each dad to their own personal happy place when they're a parent. And it's going to make them feel comfortable and confident to deal with any interactions, to deal with challenges, and to be okay. But it's their version of okay.
Yeah. So you've described their self-care, self-reflection, which generationally, there's multiple generations who don't have that skill set at all. And we can criticize people for that, or we can say, why would you? Why would you have that skill set when we never spoke about it? We never taught anyone about it. You were never taught how to do it. Of course, you're not good at self-reflecting because no one's ever even told you that it was a thing before. We can't expect everyone to be able to do it, which I think that's the great answer, by the way, Peter, to the question about giving people or empowering people to have that sense of self-reflection.
Yeah.
So they can then go, all right, okay, that's why I did that. Can I give you an example of parenting that made me think, oh, actually, there's something in this. This is from when I was growing up. So my little brother got into trouble swearing on the bus or whatever, going on a school trip. And the teacher took him off the bus and said, right, you're not going on the school trip. I said, who was swearing? He went, oh, yeah, it was me. And he went, right, you're not coming on the school trip. And it was at the time, I remember it was very serious, like, oh, swearing and not allowed to go on the school trip. I remember thinking, oh. Anyway, it flared up at the parents' evening. And my mum went in to speak to the teacher. And he said, obviously, I had the incident with the thing. And she said, let me ask you about that. She said, someone was swearing on the bus. You said, who's swearing on the bus? My son put his hand up and said, yeah, it was me. And admitted that he was at fault.
Yeah.
You told him he couldn't go on the school trip. What message do you think that has sent to my son?
Don't tell the truth.
And I was just like, oh, Mum, you're good. Like that is, I thought, flipping heck, Mum, that's absolute, like, that is sort of level 9 parenting right there. And of course, he didn't know what to say at that point. But it did make me think, oh, the world isn't this sort of like straight lines, things happen, cause and effect. There's this other stuff going on, which you don't know about as a kid because you don't feel like you're developing as a child just because you just feel like that's life.
Absolutely, yeah.
But there are constantly these things, these sort of lessons that you learn, reflect on, and need to have, I think, positively reinforced to know that they're lessons, to allow you to grow and to see what is a little bit of it's I think as much as anything, we live in a world where there's not a lot of social justice. You know, there's no consequences for people in power doing a lot. You can make loads of mistakes and nothing ever happens as a result of it. But equally, you can be poor, working class, make mistakes, and actually get the blame for those mistakes and be responsible for your own mistakes. And if you didn't learn from those lessons, that's all your fault. There's a lot of that right across society. Huge, inequalities where people who aren't responsible for something get the blame for something, and that might be immigrants, or it might be a million and one different thing. But I think that those sort of lessons of social justice, we need to sort of be able to do that as a parent, and to sort of instill that, so children recognize then when something isn't right. Hang on a minute, that doesn't sound quite right to me.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you become programmed, don't you, to listen to the teacher's version of events.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is basically, well, I've decided that's the case, and actually, once I've made a decision, that's the end of it. I think there's a lot of that in parenting where you're constantly having to see a whole big picture and try and guide both yourself and your child through that big picture.
Yeah.
Even when you can't maybe fully explain why the picture is so big and what's so complex there.
I think that's a fantastic point, because I've realized, so Frank's in school, me and my wife made a decision, he's gone to school. Even though I personally have some conflict around the schooling system, what it means, what it does, and the wider consequences of that. That's for another podcast, obviously. But what I realized is it makes me analyze, and like your mom in that situation, I never take a teacher's word for it. I never take their version of events for it, because I think I had my fingers burnt as a pupil in those situations. And I'm like, you're just a man or you're just a woman who's made a snap decision here. I don't necessarily know if it's the right one or the wrong one. And because I'm now responsible for a little boy's growing into this world, I'm like, right, the first sign of any kind of thing, I'm on it and I'm kind of challenging it. And my wife's like, just be careful. You're not bringing your past into this. Like, this is his experience. Like, don't try and create a world from your perspective just because you think of it in that way. And I think that's a valid parent lesson, is don't always assume your version is correct, and don't always assume someone else's version is correct. Yeah. Maybe just be willing to be wrong, or be willing to ask some questions.
I think that's one of the things as well about parenthood, whereby for a large period of time, you are the only authority. But there comes a point, isn't there? And sometimes that can come with grandparents. Sometimes they're the first ones, or aunties, the baby. Well, auntie such a body lets us do that. That's the first time a child will start going, oh, hang on a minute, there is an alternative reality out there.
Yeah.
So, and I think when you're a parent, particularly with schools, the thoughts and feelings on the system, if you like, aside, there is a point where, as a parent, you hand over responsibilities, don't you, to other adults and say, right, for this period of time, I'm expecting you to set these parameters for my child and to care for my child and all of those things, so that when they come back to me, they're the same child and they are grown or enhanced. And that's, if you think about it, that's like a big call to make. If that was like a wolf pack, does a wolf go, are there any other wolves who can look after my cub for a little bit? I don't know if that's
just like me, just the same as me, but a bit different.
Yeah. No, it would be a surprise, wouldn't it, if they went, oh yeah, there's a great wolf. Yeah, but actually as humans, we kind of do. But that's about, I think, as much as anything, maybe that's about letting your child see that there are other points of view and assess.
I like that one. I like that one.
That there are other things.
I like that one, because I always think, I like Frank to know that there are other people who are more of an idiot than me, or do more stupid things than I do. So then he'll go, oh, that's all right, actually.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, no, I get that. And I think the trust issue, that's probably a big thing for me, is the trusting an education system and a specific teacher that has your kid for about 30 hours a week to do what you would do in that situation, to read it in the same way. But that isn't the case, unfortunately. Yeah,
absolutely. That is a conversation to be had another day. Absolutely, it is, but it's a very interesting conversation.
Yes.
Pete, in terms of the sort of the Parents in Mind service you got up and running, you mentioned some of the places that are involved. Do you have to be part of the NCT sort of club to be sort of to become part of it? If there is a parent who's listening to this thinking, oh, you know what, this is a conversation I probably need to have, or even if they're thinking, you know what, I'm about to go into this parenthood thing and I don't know what's going to come my way. Can I have a sort of a pre-chat with people like yourself? What are the sort of the entrances really into this?
A very good shout, that is, mate. We have purposefully, so I'll just give a brief background on it. It started off as mainly support for mums. Then they realised there was a big gap, like dads weren't being given anything. So we're a pilot scheme effectively. And what happened was, at the beginning, we tried to reflect the same service as it was for mums. And I think when I became kind of the ambassador for it, I said, I don't think this is going to work in the same way. Men in general at the moment won't access informational help in the same way that a mum will do. So we started making podcasts, which is freely available. It's on YouTube. It's on the NCT YouTube channel. And that's basically us having these conversations like this that gives a platform that it's okay for dads to talk about these kind of issues. There's also some general practical stuff that we probably talk about that may not have occurred to a new dad. We do one-to-one. For one-to-one, you have to be referred. You have to go through a referral process, which is through NCT, Parents in Mind. A lot of mums will be already on board with that, but they will often say, oh, is there anything for my husband? Which is when they get referred to us. We also do a walk and a talk session. Now, that's freely available and open to anyone. You don't need to be referred. You don't need to do anything. You just, if you're a dad and you fancy chatting to some like-minded dads, just come down, and there's information about that. That's freely available. That's freely accessible. I'm also in the process of making creative sessions because I'm a photographer. And I want that to just be for any dads who want to possibly have a chance to be creative. And through that creativity, we can start to open up discussions about mental health, about being a parent, about the challenges that we face. But we're not coming into that room as someone who needs fixing. We're literally coming to that room as someone who is in a new situation that they want to share with some other people. And then from that, we can open it up.
You mentioned the fact that it's a a pilot scheme, and a lot of this feels kind of new, even from an offer which wasn't there, even when I became a parent, 7 years ago, and then 4 years ago. Is there sort of a golden bullet, if you like, that we need in the system that just maybe engages dads maybe earlier on, or alerts them to some of the big changes that are coming their way, in the way that I think mums kind of get, because they physically have to go, they physically have to go on a journey, whereas dads emotionally have to go on a journey, but can opt out of large parts of that journey if they choose to.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether or not there is something which means that dads engaged maybe earlier on, or dads with a contact point throughout a period, would be something which might just change this whole game as we move into the future.
Yeah, good point. And a good phrase which sprung to mind in the training was, it's a quote from Desmond Tutu, and he says, rather than pulling people out the river downstream, why don't we find out why they're falling in the first place? So it's like, let's get to the root of this. Let's not react. Let's get to the root of this thing. I think awareness, and I think permission. And I had a good chat to some tutors of midwives last week and told them about our service and what we do, and the value of having what we like to phrase whole family. If the whole family is in a thriving place, then the better the opportunities this child's going to have to feel loved and nourished and cared for. Let's not wait till people are in crisis. Let's have these conversations from the very beginning of this process and say, look, this is going to change your world. This is going to flip it upside down. There are going to be times where you're going to be challenged, and you're probably going to be reminded of your own childhood. These are elements of support that are around you now. And we urge you to be open with each other, to be honest with each other, and not think that you have to fit some predisposed template of the perfect mom and the perfect dad. Those things don't exist. They're just in TV and films. You are the parent that you're going to be, and that's it. And the more permission we give for men to have these conversations with their wives, with their partners, and with each other, that this is a hard thing to go through, and actually there may be a fallout from it, I think we'll start to put some kind of process in place where NCT and the NHS will value it enough to put some funding into it and make it a priority, that mums and dads are all cared for in this process. Absolutely.
It seems like something which is going to be sort of growing as an idea. And I think, you're obviously sort of trailblazing it at the start, Pete, and those dads who are sort of signing up and getting involved, that they'll become the first sort of generation who've sort of self-educated, as opposed to,
Yeah, and I think the beauty of it, sorry to cut in there, the beauty of it is we're dads mentoring dads, and then those dads can then mentor other dads. Because what we want to do, we're actually trying to recruit more volunteers to train up, because we want to grow this as much as we can. And we've got a group of, there's 6 dads who have been referred into our service now, and it is growing exponentially now. The idea is that we then mentor these dads, and then we can probably say, well, hey, you've got this, and then they can mentor someone else, and on it grows, and then the supportive community is just there.
Pete, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Mick. Pleasure. Lovely to chat to you, mate.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.